Joining us now, MS Now reporter Alex Tabbitt in West Palm Beach, Florida, MS Now senior national security reporter David Rode, and the program director at the Institute for Global Affairs at the Eurasia Group, Jonathan Geyer. It's great to have all of you with me this afternoon. Alex, I'll start with you there in West Palm. What else did the president say about Gaza and his relationship with Netanyahu?
Well, Antonio, the president said that they are going to be covering about 5 different topics during this meeting between President Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu. This is what President Trump specifically said about Gaza. As you played at the top there, President Trump lavished praise on Prime Minister Netanyahu, saying that he's a wartime prime minister, saying that he's done an incredible job, and saying that Israel may not exist if Netanyahu was not the prime minister during these recent years. He later said Bibi is a strong man, but he can, quote, be a very difficult on occasion. That's the closest thing that we heard to a criticism of Prime Minister Netanyahu from President Trump. Later on, President Trump said the reconstruction effort of Gaza will begin pretty soon and said that the U.S. has already started working on improving some of the sanitary conditions. It's important to remember, Antonia, that Gaza currently has about 68 million tons of rubble. So there's a major reconstruction effort needed there. And then when asked about Ron Willie, that's the deceased hostages whose remains were not yet returned, has not yet been returned to Israel, President Trump was asked if the ceasefire can move on to phase 2 before those remains are returned. He dodged that question, and President Trump took credit for returning all of the hostages back to Israel, falsely claiming that none of the hostages were returned under the Biden administration. Of course, that is not true. More than 100 hostages were returned under President Biden. Antonia.
Jonathan, I'm curious what you make of this stage of the back and forth. This is the 6th meeting this year between Netanyahu and Trump. And we know from the reporting in the background that many White House officials around Trump have grown very frustrated with Netanyahu. They believe he's stalling here, trying to buy more time, not committed to the peace process and to moving into phase 2. But of course, it seemed pretty chummy there before this meeting got started. What do you make? How do you read these tea leaves?
Well, of course, the president is not only facing down Netanyahu, but he's facing down really massive splits in both parties over Israel policy. Democrats very critical of the status quo on Israel. I think we see that with the election of Zoran Mamdani here. 75% of Democrats view this as a genocide that Israel's conducted in Gaza. On the other hand, the MAGA splits, Tucker Carlson. We have a major split and this longtime allies. So I think
it was all out in the open at the Turning Point conference.
Exactly. So the president is trying to navigate splits within his own party. He says he's the America First president, but I think many Americans, and this is according to my organization's polling, say they don't want to continue to support Israel with military aid unless this ceasefire continues. And so this ceasefire is really on the line. 400 Palestinians killed. 2 million Palestinians in Gaza are in need, according to the UN. 2 million. This is a humanitarian travesty, and the aid trucks were supposed to be 500 a day. Only about 100 a day are getting in. So I think the president really needs to get done some of the promises from the first phase of the ceasefire before he can even get to the next phase.
David, pretty fundamental question as we see these two men head into this meeting this afternoon. Are there any Palestinians at the table as they discuss the future of Gaza?
So the Palestinian Authority is not at the table and was not included in any of the ceasefire negotiations, and that's a huge issue for Palestinians. The majority of Palestinians live on the West Bank, and Netanyahu's government has sort of increased settlement construction on the West Bank while this is happening. But I would agree with both points that were made earlier. This is a critical moment for Donald Trump. The first stage of the Gaza ceasefire was a tremendous achievement by President Trump. I would say it was his signature foreign policy achievement of his year in office so far. But this is sort of slowly unraveling. There's supposed to be a stabilization force with troops from majority Muslim countries. None of that has come together. Israel is not backing down, and then Hamas, of course, won't disarm. And the stabilization force was supposed to play an effort in disarming Hamas. So this is a critical meeting, and the president achieved that ceasefire by pressuring Netanyahu, and we'll see if he does that in private or not. He clearly praised him in public when they arrived, but the stakes are high for Donald Trump here as well.
David, can you break down for us what an international stabilization force really means? I think many people will have questions about a U.S.-backed security force. We know that many of the people approached about this are wary of being seen as part of a occupying or security force on the ground there. This is, of course, very delicate, though critical work. And then there's the fact that the U.S. has also faced a ton of criticism over its involvement in the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation and criticisms from human rights and humanitarian organizations that was a failure, that it did not lead to progress. If anything, it may have impeded it at times. So what would that kind of force look like? And do you believe the Trump administration is capable of making that actually happen?
So it's the difference in terms of the force is that the UN Security Council supported it. And that matches sort of past peacekeeping efforts in different countries around the world. And again, that's a positive achievement by the Trump administration. But since that happened earlier in the fall, there's been very little progress. The idea was that it was going to be troops from Egypt, maybe some from Turkey, and some other countries, possibly Indonesia, that would go in. But those governments have just said, the Egyptian government just said recently, they'll only go in as peacekeepers. They don't want to get in sort of gun battles with Hamas. And the problem is that the progress sort of stalled over the course of the fall. The president is focusing on Ukraine. I'm sure you'll talk about that in this hour as well. Venezuela, he ordered strikes in Somalia and Nigeria just the last few days again. So there's sort of this scattered American foreign policy approach. And again, I would just argue, even for the president politically, in terms of foreign policy, Gaza is key, and he made great progress in the fall, but he's in danger of losing all that progress if he doesn't pay more attention to this issue and get Gaza sorted out.
Right. He's in danger of losing some of that progress here, but he's also facing a very fractured coalition at home. And part of that coalition is very angry, not just about, the war in Israel and Gaza, but also all of the other strikes and sort of interventionist actions that we've seen abroad. Alex, you had the chance to speak to some young Republicans recently. What did you learn about the role that they're playing in this divide? And do you think the president is aware of the way in which attitude, the sentiment is shifting in the U.S.?
Well, Antonio, I actually went to Turning Point USA's America Fest conference. It's the largest gathering of young conservatives in the country. And the fissures in the Republican Party with regard to Israel were on full display on stage. You heard right-wing conservative commentators bickering back and forth about American support for Israel. But I wanted to hear if those fissures extended out into the crowd. So I talked to 6 young conservatives, asked them what they think about the American support of Israel, and what they had to say may surprise you. Take a listen.
What they've done in Gaza is objectively a genocide. It's objectively. They've killed tens of thousands of women and children. We shouldn't be okay with that.
I think that they somehow are owning us as a country. Like, we shouldn't have. They seem to have some sort of pull over us, and I don't understand where and why our country is letting that happen. Where is the benefit to us from sending them money?
And Antonia, that sort of criticism is something you might expect to hear at a Democratic rally, but to hear it at Turning Point USA's conference, it was quite striking. Of course, recent polling has shown a souring on American support for Israel amongst the Democratic Party, amongst independent voters. Also within Republican voters, particularly younger Republican voters, although at a much more moderate pace of decline. Antonia?
Alex, great job reporting through the soundtrack behind you there. I know exactly what that is like. Jonathan, what is Netanyahu facing at home right now? And how does that factor into his strategy, his conversations with Trump?
Well, Israel, Antonia, has had this huge rightward pull. I mean, really extremist leaders in powerful national security positions. And one of the key issues I think they're gunning for is attacks on Iran, trying to bring the U.S. into further strikes on Iran. And I think that's very risky, very dangerous. And I hope President Trump draws a red line there, because those strikes in June were not as effective as many have reported on. And one of the real dangers is regional escalation, that this could get out of control, not to mention all the innocents, women, children, civilians that were killed. Not very effective strikes, Antonia. So the fact that Netanyahu is back, meeting in Mar-a-Lago, pushing for militaristic action on Iran, it is not...
Do you think Trump is going to be swayed by it, interested in it?
I mean, he certainly was in June and then pulled back. I think it's a bit of a back and forth. I think you could call Trump a reckless peacemaker. He's kind of all over the place. He says he's ended 8 wars, but then if you look, he's bombed 7 countries so far this year. It's basically the last guy he spoke with. So if the last guy is Prime Minister Netanyahu, it's a bit worrisome, but hopefully some people in his inner circle are going to say, wait a second, there are immense risks to attacking Iran.